A house surrounded by luxury and silence becomes the stage for a dangerous game of appearances. The arrival of a charming visitor awakens suspicions, buried beneath smiles and porcelain. When an accident occurs and a mysterious message appears, everything shifts out of place. In the darkness of doubt, the truth begins to move, and no one is truly safe. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's begin. The Cape Coral sun drew golden patterns on the glass walls of the Alistair mansion. Built on rocks that seemed to converse with the Atlantic, the residence was a monument to elegance and power. Helen Alistair observed the horizon from her main balcony, her grey hair meticulously pulled back into a low bun, her steady hands holding an English porcelain cup. At 62, her gaze carried the wisdom of someone who had learned that every smile can hide an intention. The sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of her only son. Helen adjusted her navy blue linen dress and took a deep breath. Robert had mentioned he would bring someone special to meet her. It wasn't the first time this had happened, but something in his tone of voice on the phone suggested this visit would be different from the previous ones. Robert Alistair, at 35, had inherited from his father not only the business empire, but also his elegant bearing and analytical gaze. Unlike his father, however, Robert had an easier smile, a willingness to believe in the best in people that sometimes worried Helen. Since Richard Alistair's passing 7 years prior, she had dedicated every moment to shaping her son for the challenges that awaited him. The business world did not forgive naivete, especially when it came to matters of the heart. "Mother," Robert's voice echoed through the entrance hall. Helen descended the stairs with the impeccable posture that characterized her. Beside her son stood a woman who looked as if she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Brown hair with golden highlights, framing a face with delicate features, almond-shaped eyes, and perfectly outlined lips with discreet lipstick. She wore a peach-toned silk ensemble that revealed subtle and elegant curves. "This is Camilla Miller," Robert introduced, with a sparkle in his eyes that Helen recognized immediately. It was the same sparkle Richard had when he met her decades ago. "We're engaged." Helen felt the world spin for an instant, but maintained the diplomatic smile that years of social life had perfected. She had not expected such a definitive announcement. Robert's previous girlfriends had been introduced with more caution, more preparation time. "What a wonderful surprise," she replied, extending her hands to the young woman. "Welcome to our home, Camilla." "You are exactly as Robert described," Camilla responded, with a melodious voice that perfectly matched her appearance. "Elegant and welcoming. It's an honor to finally meet you." The lunch that followed was impeccable, like everything Helen supervised. Jane, the housekeeper who had served the family for almost 20 years, had prepared Robert's favorite dish, shrimp stew with all the traditional accompaniments. Camilla praised every detail, from the table setting to the perfectly balanced seasoning of the stew. She spoke of art, commented on the paintings in the living room, and asked about the family's history with seemingly genuine interest. "So you work with interior design?" Helen asked between bites. "Yes, I have my own studio in South Beach. Small but with loyal clients," Camilla replied, delicately placing her napkin on her lap. "I met Robert when he was looking for someone to redesign the company's office. It was a challenging but very rewarding project." "Camilla transformed that place," Robert added proudly. "The employees say the environment became more productive, more inspiring." Helen nodded, observing how Camilla's hand rested naturally on Robert's. There was something about her gestures, an almost studied precision, as if every movement had been rehearsed beforehand. Nothing was out of place, not a single hair, not a hesitation in her voice, not an inappropriate comment. "And your family, Camilla? Where are they from?" Helen asked, serving herself more salad. "We are originally from Virginia. My parents separated when I was 12. My mother moved back to Richmond and my father moved abroad. I have little contact with either of them, unfortunately." Camilla sighed with a touch of melancholy that seemed genuine. "Perhaps that's why I value the idea of building my own family so much." Lunch extended into the afternoon, with Camilla recounting her travels through Europe, her design education at NYU, her future projects. Helen listened attentively, not just to the words but to the silences between them. There were subtle inconsistencies in her story, moments where she seemed to adjust facts according to the listener's reaction. Nothing concrete that could be pointed out, just a discomfort that Helen couldn't ignore. When the couple finally said goodbye, early in the evening, Robert hugged his mother enthusiastically. "She's amazing, isn't she?" Helen smiled, touching her son's face. "She certainly knows how to make a good impression." In the weeks that followed, Camilla became a constant presence at the mansion. She brought flowers for Helen, participated in business lunches, and charmed the older staff with her attention to detail. Even Jane, normally reserved with strangers, commented on how the future lady of the house had a special way about her. One Sunday afternoon, while Robert was on a work call in the office, Helen found Camilla in the mansion's library, seemingly absorbed in a collection of old family photographs. "You look so happy here," Camilla commented, showing a photo of Helen and Richard on a trip to the Caribbean. "Robert has his father's same smile." "Richard was an extraordinary man," Helen replied, sitting next to her future daughter-in-law. "He built everything from scratch, you know. He started with a small construction company and turned it into a conglomerate. But he never lost the ability to marvel at simple things." "Robert speaks of him with such pride," Camilla said, carefully closing the photo album. "And of you too, of course. He says you were the pillar that kept everything going, even in the most difficult times." Helen observed Camilla with renewed attention. There was something in her tone, a combination of admiration and calculation that awakened all her maternal protective instincts. "Marriage isn't just about love, Camilla," Helen said softly. "It's about partnership, mutual trust. Richard and I faced many storms together. I hope you and Robert have the same strength." "I will make Robert very happy, Mrs. Alistair, I promise." Camilla held her future mother-in-law's hands, looking directly into her eyes. There was determination there, but Helen couldn't decipher whether it was the determination to love or to conquer. The next day brought news that would change the course of events. While having breakfast on the balcony, Helen received a message on her cell phone. The number was not registered in her contacts, and the content was brief. "Beware of those who pretend to care. Not everything is as it seems. Ask about Talia." Helen stared at the screen for long minutes. It was not her habit to give importance to anonymous messages, but the name Talia caused an inexplicable unease. She decided not to share the message with anyone, not even with Jane, her long-time confidant. Some instincts needed to be investigated in silence. That same evening, during a dinner with close family friends, Helen observed how Camilla dominated the conversation, telling stories about her famous clients, her innovative ideas for the house she planned to build with Robert. Her son looked at her with evident adoration, occasionally interrupting to add how she had revolutionized his life in just a few months of their relationship. It was during dessert that Helen decided to cast a bait. "Robert, do you remember Talia? Morris Davis's daughter, the one who studied with you at St. Benedict's School?" The name fell like a stone into the calm lake of conversation. For a fraction of a second, so brief that only trained eyes like Helen's could notice, Camilla froze. The dessert spoon stopped halfway between the plate and her lips, and her smile wavered slightly. "Talia Davis? Of course I remember," Robert replied, oblivious to the sudden tension. "Didn't she move abroad? Something related to fashion, if I'm not mistaken." "Yes, exactly," Helen answered, without taking her eyes off Camilla, who had regained her composure, and was now smiling as if the name meant nothing. "Apparently she's back in the country. Someone mentioned her the other day." "The fashion world is so competitive," Camilla commented with studied naturalness. "Perhaps we can invite her to an event. Always good to strengthen connections, isn't it?" The conversation moved on to other topics, but Helen had confirmed her initial suspicion. Camilla knew Talia, and this knowledge made her uncomfortable. The question was why. The next morning, as she ascended the stairs to the second floor of the mansion, Helen felt a sudden dizziness. She tried to steady herself on the railing, but her fingers found no support. The world spun for moments that seemed eternal, and then darkness. She woke up in the hospital with Robert holding her hand, his face contorted with worry. Camilla was by his side, running her fingers through her fiancé's hair in a comforting gesture. "Thank goodness you woke up," Robert said, kissing his mother's forehead. "You gave us a terrible scare." "What happened?" Helen asked, feeling a sharp pain in her lower back. "You fell down the stairs, Mother. Jane found you unconscious and called the ambulance immediately." The doctor entered the room at that moment, Dr. Paul Marshall, an old family friend who had cared for Richard during his illness. After preliminary examinations, his diagnosis was clear. Helen had suffered a spinal injury that, although not permanent, would require absolute rest for a few weeks, possibly months. He recommended a wheelchair for mobility and warned about the risks of trying to walk without proper supervision. As the doctor explained the necessary care, an idea began to form in Helen's mind. What initially seemed like a setback might actually be an opportunity. "I will take care of you personally," Camilla declared, holding Helen's hand with apparent devotion. "I can rearrange my commitments, postpone some projects. Your recovery is the priority now." Helen smiled, gently squeezing her future daughter-in-law's hand. "You are very kind, dear, but I cannot accept you sacrificing your work for my sake." "It's no sacrifice at all," Camilla insisted, with tears in her eyes. "You are the mother of the man I love." "I insist." Robert seemed deeply moved by his fiancée's dedication. Helen, for her part, saw this as the perfect chance to test Camilla's true intentions. If she truly loved Robert and respected his family, the coming days would show it. If, on the other hand, there was something more behind that veneer of perfection, the forced cohabitation would certainly reveal the first cracks. 3 days later, Helen was back at the mansion, settled in an adapted room on the ground floor. Camilla, true to her word, cancelled engagements and began sleeping in one of the guest rooms to be always available. Jane watched the new arrangements with suspicion, especially Camilla's insistence on reorganizing medications and improving the energy flow of the room. "You never used to believe in these feng shui things," Jane whispered. As she helped Helen settle down for sleep, "People change." "Jane," Helen replied with an enigmatic smile, "sometimes it's good to be open to new ideas." Camilla's dedication was exemplary. In front of Robert, she brought homemade soups, read books aloud, massaged Helen's feet with essential oils that promoted energetic healing. When Robert was not present, however, small changes became noticeable. Her tone of voice was less warm, her care more mechanical, her conversations shorter. It was during one of these moments of Robert's absence that Helen casually mentioned the will. "I've been thinking about making some changes to my will," she commented, as Camilla adjusted the pillows. "Now that you and Robert are getting married, perhaps it's time to review how the assets will be distributed." Camilla's eyes sparkled for a second. "You don't need to worry about that now. Your health is more important." "Even so," Helen insisted, observing how Camilla tried to hide her sudden interest. "I'd like to speak with my lawyer next week. Could you arrange that for me? Preferably without mentioning it to Robert yet. I don't want him to worry about these matters while he's finalizing the merger with Paul Anderson's company." "Of course. I'll do whatever is necessary," Camilla replied, unnecessarily adjusting the curtains. "Dr. Oswald, right? I can call him tomorrow." Helen nodded, satisfied. She had not mentioned her lawyer's name, and the fact that Camilla knew it indicated that she had already done her research on the family's financial affairs. Another piece fitted into the puzzle she was assembling. The next morning, Helen was introduced to a new caregiver, Dora Smith, a middle-aged woman with strong hands and kind eyes, recommended by Veronica Adams, a longtime friend of Helen's and director of a hospital in Fort Lauderdale. "Dora has experience with cases like yours," Camilla explained, as she helped Helen transfer to her wheelchair. "She'll be here during the day when I'm busy with the studio, and I'll take over at night." Helen studied the new caregiver's face and saw something there that instantly pleased her. Honesty. Dora didn't smile excessively, didn't make exaggerated promises. She introduced herself with balanced professionalism and human warmth, explaining her previous experience with rehabilitation patients and detailing the routine she suggested implementing. "You tell me what works and what doesn't," Dora stated, in a tone that allowed no dispute. "I'm here to aid in recovery, not to impose my ideas." While Camilla showed Dora around the house, Helen exchanged a meaningful glance with Jane, who smiled discreetly. It was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. With Dora there, Helen would no longer be completely at the mercy of Camilla's care. More importantly, she would have an impartial witness to what she was about to discover. Time, as Helen well knew, was the true test for masks and disguises. And now she had all the time in the world to observe how her future daughter-in-law would behave, when she believed no one important was looking. 5 days after the start of shared care, the first significant incident occurred. Helen heard agitated voices coming from the corridor. Camilla was on the phone, clearly irritated. "No, Talia, you don't understand. I can't just ask about it directly. Yes, she mentioned the will, but look, it's not that simple. The son is completely in love with me, but the mother, she has that look, you know, like she can see through walls. Yes, I'm doing my part. I've been stuck in this house for days, pretending I care about an old woman who barely tolerates me." Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. So Talia was indeed involved. And what else was Camilla pretending? Dora, who was organizing medications on the nightstand, also overheard the conversation. Her eyes met Helen's, and a silent understanding passed between them. Without a word, Dora took a small notebook from her bag and began making notes. The trap was set, and Camilla had just made her first misstep. That night, when Robert arrived for dinner, Helen observed how Camilla reverted to being the perfect fiancée. Attentive, sweet, concerned about everyone's well-being. The transformation was so complete that had Helen not overheard the phone conversation, she might even doubt her own suspicions. "How are you feeling, Mother?" Robert asked, helping her settle at the dining table specially adapted for her wheelchair. "Better every day," Helen replied, smiling. "Thanks to Camilla and Dora's care." "Camilla has been an angel," Robert commented, kissing his fiancée's hand. "I don't know what we'd do without her." Helen observed Camilla's face blush slightly with the compliment. There was genuine satisfaction there, not for the recognition of her kindness, but for the strengthening of her role in Robert's life. Helen was beginning to understand Camilla's game. It wasn't just about money, it was about power, about assuming a position that would guarantee her status and control. "Speaking of angels," Helen commented, "do you know what day it is today, Robert?" Her son frowned, confused for a moment, and then his face lit up with understanding. "Your wedding anniversary. Yours and Dad's." Helen nodded, feeling the familiar pang in her chest that accompanied memories of Richard. 38 years we would have completed today. "We should toast to him," Robert suggested, getting up to fetch a special bottle of wine. "Dad always said that life should be celebrated, even in absences." Camilla seemed uncomfortable with the sudden change of focus. Of course, a toast would be perfect. Richard must have been an extraordinary man. He was, Helen confirmed, observing how Camilla used her deceased husband's first name with an intimacy that was not hers to claim, and very perceptive about people. He used to say that eyes always reveal what words try to hide. Dinner continued with stories about Richard, how he had built the Alistair Empire, how he valued loyalty above any other virtue, how he had planned every detail of the mansion so that Helen would have the perfect view of the sea. At some point, Helen noticed Camilla discreetly checking her cell phone under the table, clearly bored with the family reminiscences. When Robert briefly excused himself to take an important call, Helen took the moment alone with Camilla. "Thank you for your patience with these old stories," she said softly. "I know it can seem excessive to an outsider." "Not at all," Camilla protested, quickly putting her phone away. "I love learning more about the family's history. Richard always said that a person's character is revealed not by what they do when everyone is watching, but by what they do when they believe no one is seeing." Helen observed a slight tremor in Camilla's smile, as if the young woman felt the implicit weight of those words. Before she could reply, Robert returned, and the conversation shifted to wedding plans, scheduled for 6 months later. Later that night, after everyone had retired, Helen stayed awake, reflecting on recent events. The anonymous message, Camilla's reaction to Talia's name, the revealing phone conversation. A pattern was forming, but important pieces of the puzzle were still missing. As the mansion fell silent and the waves crashed on the rocks below, Helen made a decision. She would not confront Camilla directly, not yet. She would let Camilla reveal her true nature, one slip at a time. And when she had enough evidence, she would protect her son in whatever way was necessary, even if it meant unmasking once and for all the charade that Camilla Miller had orchestrated. 2 weeks had passed since Helen's fall, and the routine at the Alistair mansion had found a new rhythm. In the mornings, Dora took over the care, physical therapy exercises, bathing, medications. In the afternoons, Camilla appeared, always with gifts, new books, fresh flowers, gastronomic delights that would make recovery more pleasant. Evenings were divided. When Robert was home, Camilla was the perfect daughter-in-law. When he traveled for business, she delegated nighttime care to Jane, citing migraines or unavoidable commitments. On a particularly warm afternoon, as Helen rested in the winter garden attached to the main living room, Dora discreetly approached with her notebook. "Mrs. Alistair, I think you should see this," she whispered, checking if they were truly alone. "I've noticed some patterns." Helen accepted the notebook, adjusting her reading glasses. The pages contained meticulous observations. Times Camilla compulsively checked her phone, whispered phone conversations when she thought no one was around, disdainful comments about household items that would certainly be replaced after the wedding. "Last night," Dora continued in a low voice, "while you were sleeping and Mr. Robert was in New York City, I heard Miss Camilla on the phone again. She mentioned something about making sure the main clause isn't altered before the ceremony." Helen nodded slowly. The famous clause in Richard's will stipulated that if Robert married, he would immediately gain access to a significant portion of the company's shares that were still under Helen's control, as executrix of the estate. It was a provision created to ensure the continuity of the business in the next generation, an Alistair family tradition. "There's one more thing," Dora added hesitantly. "I noticed that emerald necklace, the one in the wooden box in your office, it isn't there anymore." Helen felt her blood run cold. The necklace had belonged to her grandmother, passed down through generations. It was not just a valuable piece of jewelry, but a symbol of family history. "Are you sure, Dora?" "Absolutely. I went to clean the office as you asked, and the box was there but empty. The puzzle gained new pieces, each more disturbing than the last." Helen had trusted her instinct from the beginning, but now she had concrete evidence. Camilla was not just feigning affection, she was systematically preparing the ground for something bigger. That same evening, during dinner, Helen decided to test Camilla's reaction. "I was thinking of wearing grandmother's emerald necklace to your engagement party," she commented casually, as Jane served dessert. "It would be a beautiful symbol of family continuity." Camilla froze momentarily, her spoon suspended in the air. "Emerald necklace?" "Yes, the one in my office, in the rosewood box. My grandmother wore it at her wedding. I wore it at mine, and I thought perhaps you could wear it at yours with Robert." "That's a wonderful idea, Mother," Robert interjected enthusiastically. "Camilla would look stunning in it, wouldn't she, darling?" "Of course," Camilla replied, regaining her composure. "It would be an honor. But don't worry about it now, Mrs. Alistair. We have time to decide those details." "Actually," Helen insisted gently, "I'd like to show it to you tonight, to see if it matches the dress you're planning." "Tonight wouldn't be ideal," Camilla quickly responded. "I'm getting a terrible headache, and I've already promised Louisa I'd stop by her apartment to check on a plumbing problem." "Louisa?" Robert asked, surprised. "Your cousin who lives in Miami Beach. You didn't mention you were going to see her today." "It was a last-minute request," Camilla explained, getting up to take her plate to the kitchen, an unusual gesture that revealed her discomfort. "She called me this afternoon, desperate. You know how she is." Helen exchanged a meaningful glance with Dora, who remained discreetly near the door. The lie was obvious. Camilla had never mentioned a cousin named Louisa before, and now, pressured about the necklace, she invented an emergency to escape the confrontation. After Camilla hastily left, claiming she needed to pick up some documents at her apartment before going to her cousin's house, Helen asked Dora to take her to the office. "I want to check something," she explained, as Dora pushed her wheelchair down the corridor. "And I need you to be my witness." In the office, Helen asked Dora to open the central desk drawer and retrieve a blue folder marked Inventory. Inside, there was a meticulous list of all the family jewels, with photographs and recent appraisals. "Look at this," Helen pointed to a specific entry. "Emerald and diamond necklace, platinum setting, circa 1895. Last appraisal, $2,300,000. Dora whistled softly, impressed. "You think she—" "I'm not sure yet, but we need to find out." Helen flipped through a few more pages of the folder until she found what she was looking for. "Here it is, the insurance policy. I'll call Paul Harrison tomorrow. He's the investigator who works for the insurance company. Discreet and efficient. The next morning, as Dora helped Helen with the strengthening exercises recommended by the physical therapist, the phone rang. It was Robert, calling from New York City, where he had gone to resolve issues related to the merger with Paul Anderson's company. "Mother, you won't believe it. I just received the invitation for this year's Business Excellence Award. I'm going to be honored in the Sustainable Innovation category." "That's wonderful, son," Helen exclaimed, genuinely proud. "Your father would be so happy. The ceremony is next week at Carnegie Hall. I want you to be there with me in the front row. Camilla is already organizing everything. Your dress, special transport for the wheelchair, everything?" Helen hesitated for a moment. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "I'm still not very presentable." "Don't be silly, Mother. You look great. And I wouldn't be receiving this award if it weren't for you and Dad. You need to be there." After the call ended, Helen remained thoughtful. The awards ceremony would be a perfect opportunity to observe Camilla in a social environment, away from the mansion's protection. Furthermore, the event would certainly attract media attention and important figures from the business world, an ideal stage for someone who valued status and recognition. Camilla arrived in the afternoon, carrying bags from a luxury boutique. "I brought some dress options for the ceremony," she announced with evident enthusiasm. "Robert told me you're going to the awards. It's going to be such a special moment for the family." Helen smiled, noting how the concept of family in Camilla's mouth sounded artificial. "Very kind of you to worry about my appearance." "It's the least I can do," Camilla replied, pulling sober yet elegant dresses from the bags. "After all, we'll be the center of attention. The matriarch of the Alistairs, the award-winning heir, and his future wife. The journalists will love that image." The calculating tone did not go unnoticed by Helen. This was not the speech of someone concerned about her mother-in-law's comfort or proud of her fiancé's achievement. It was the strategy of someone carefully constructing a public narrative. In the days leading up to the ceremony, Helen observed how Camilla became increasingly focused on the preparations, constantly talking about who would be present, what the media coverage would be like, how the VIP guests would be impressed. The award itself, a significant achievement in Robert's career, seemed secondary to the social opportunity it represented. On a particularly tense afternoon, Helen caught Camilla in a heated phone argument in the backyard. "No, Talia, you don't understand. We need more money now. The broker in Miami said the initial deposit needs to be higher. I don't care how you get it, just make it happen. The perfect property won't wait forever." Helen frowned, intrigued. "Miami? Property? Where would this money come from, and why the rush?" The missing piece was provided the next morning, when Paul Harrison, the insurance investigator, called. "Mrs. Alistair, we checked with all the luxury jewelers in New York City and found your necklace," he informed in a professional tone. "It was left as collateral for a substantial loan at a specialized house in South Beach. The person who left it identified herself as Talia Davis, but used documents in the name of Camilla Miller." Helen's heart raced. So that was it. Talia and Camilla were working together, using the necklace as collateral to raise funds. The question was, for what? "How much was the loan, Paul?" $800,000, Mrs. Alistair, and from what I could gather, it wasn't the first time. There are records of other jewels being used as collateral in recent months, totaling almost $2 million. The confirmation was devastating, but necessary. Helen thanked the investigator and asked him to prepare a full report, but not to take any action for now. This was a situation that needed to be resolved within the family at the right time. On the night of the ceremony, the Alistair mansion was a whirlwind of activity. Dora helped Helen dress in an elegant navy blue ensemble, discreet but sophisticated. Camilla, for her part, had chosen a daring red dress with a neckline that would certainly attract attention. "You look beautiful," Dora commented, adjusting the pearl necklace around Helen's neck. "A true lady." "Thank you, Dora," Helen replied, squeezing the caregiver's hand. "You've been a blessing these difficult weeks." When Robert appeared at the door, impeccable in his tuxedo, Helen's eyes filled with tears of pride. He was so much like Richard, the same posture, the same genuine smile. How could she protect him without destroying his happiness? "I am so proud of you, son," she said, holding Robert's hands. "This award is recognition of all your hard work, your vision." "I learned from the best," Robert replied, kissing his mother's forehead. The moment was interrupted by Camilla, who rushed into the room. "The car is waiting, darling. We need to go if we don't want to be late." On the way to Carnegie Hall, Helen observed how Camilla dominated the conversation, talking about the important people they would meet, how her dress had been praised by the stylist, how the jewelry store had lent special earrings for the occasion. Robert listened patiently, occasionally looking out the window with a distant expression. "Are you nervous, son?" Helen asked softly. "A little," he admitted. "I always thought that when this moment came, Dad would be here to see it." "He is, in a way," Helen replied, squeezing her son's hand. "In everything you've built, in every decision you make with integrity." Camilla cleared her throat, visibly annoyed by the sentimental turn of the conversation. "I remembered I need to confirm with the Business World magazine photographer. They wanted an exclusive moment with you before the ceremony." The arrival at the theatre was exactly as Helen had imagined. Cameras everywhere, elegant guests, an atmosphere of contained celebration, typical of high-level business. The wheelchair attracted sympathetic glances that Helen hated, but endured with dignity. This was not the time for personal pride. It was the time to observe Camilla in her element. And what an element it was. Camilla navigated through groups as if she had been born for it, introducing herself as the future Mrs. Allister, strategically positioning herself for photos, mentioning Robert's projects as if they were partly hers. Helen noticed how she kept a possessive hand on her fiancé's arm, as if marking territory. During the ceremony, sitting in the front row as Robert had asked, Helen felt a pang of discomfort. It wasn't just the physical pain, to which she was already accustomed, but a deeper unease. With each passing minute, it became clearer what Camilla really wanted. It wasn't Robert, the man, but Robert, the Allister heir. When Robert's name was announced, he went up to the stage to warm applause. His speech was brief, elegant, and emotional. He thanked his parents for their example, his collaborators for their dedication, and finally, the woman who brought new light into my life, Camilla. Helen observed Camilla's face light up with public recognition. There was no genuine love there, only satisfaction for another step completed in her plan. At the end of the ceremony, as guests headed to the cocktail party, Helen asked Dora to take her to the restroom to freshen up. "Are you feeling well, Mrs. Allister?" Dora asked, concerned about her employer's pallor. "I'm tired, Dora. I think I shouldn't have come. Do you want me to call Mr. Robert?" "We can leave early." Helen hesitated, considering the suggestion. But then, through the half-open restroom door, she saw Camilla in the corridor talking on the phone. The expression on her face was completely different from the social mask she had worn all night. There was irritation, impatience. "Wait, Dora," Helen whispered, signaling for the caregiver to approach to listen. "It was perfect. Talia," Camilla was saying on the phone in a low but audible voice. "All the important people were here. They made a point of introducing me as the new force of the Allisters. I'm telling you, in 6 months, when the wedding happens and the clause comes into effect, we'll have access to everything." Yes, the old woman came in her wheelchair playing the brave matriarch. Everyone fell for that united family image. If they only knew. Helen felt her blood run cold. The final confirmation was there, raw and undeniable. It wasn't just about stolen jewels or borrowed money. It was a systematic plan to seize control of the family fortune through marriage to Robert. "Let's go back to the ballroom." "Dora," Helen ordered, with a calm that surprised even herself. "It's not time for confrontation yet." During the cocktail party, Helen maintained a diplomatic smile, accepting congratulations for her son's achievement, observing how Camilla circulated among the guests, as if she already owned the Allister empire. Robert, for his part, seemed genuinely happy, not for professional recognition, but for having the 2 women in his life present at such an important moment. On the way back to the mansion, Camilla didn't stop talking about the contacts she had made, the doors that would open, the invitations they would surely receive for exclusive events. Helen listened in silence, carefully planning her next steps. The situation was delicate. She had evidence of Camilla's dishonesty, but confronting her directly could alienate Robert, who was clearly in love. Arriving home, Robert helped his mother settle in the living room, while Camilla went upstairs to change clothes, claiming her dress was uncomfortable. "You seemed tired during the cocktail party," Robert commented, concerned. "Perhaps it was too early for such a long event." "It was worth it to see you receive the recognition you deserve," Helen replied, holding her son's hand. "Your father would be so proud, Robert." "So proud." "I know," he responded with watery eyes. "Sometimes I feel like I'm still trying to prove my worth to him." "You never needed to prove anything. Richard knew exactly who you are." They remained silent for a few moments, sharing unspoken memories. Finally, Helen decided it was time to plant the first seed of doubt. "Son, are you truly happy with Camilla?" Robert seemed surprised by the question. "Of course I am, Mother." "Why do you ask?" "It's just a mother's instinct," Helen replied, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes I wonder if you both want the same things out of life." "What do you mean?" "You've always valued simplicity, integrity. Camilla seems so focused on appearances, on status." Robert frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the observation. "Camilla just understands the importance of social connections for business. She's trying to help in her own way." "Of course, son. I just want to be sure you're following your heart, not just being swept along by the current." Before Robert could reply, Camilla returned to the living room, now wearing a comfortable silk ensemble. "What were you two talking about?" "You look so serious." "Just reminiscing about Dad," Robert replied without elaborating. "I'll prepare a drink for us to celebrate. The special whiskey we save for occasions like this." As Robert headed to the bar, Camilla sat across from Helen, crossing her legs elegantly. There was something predatory in her gaze, as if she sensed that a silent battle had begun. "It was a perfect night, wasn't it, Mrs. Alistair?" she commented with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Robert shone so brightly. And you too, of course. Everyone commented on your strength in appearing publicly, even with your current condition." "Life doesn't stop because of temporary limitations," Helen replied, meeting Camilla's gaze. "Some things are more important than vanity." "Certainly," Camilla agreed, unnecessarily adjusting a sofa cushion. "Speaking of which, I was thinking of postponing the engagement party. Perhaps it's better to wait until you're fully recovered. We don't want you to feel uncomfortable." The falsely concerned tone didn't fool Helen for a second. Camilla didn't want to postpone anything. She was testing her reaction, looking for signs of weakness or suspicion. "There's no need to postpone for my sake," Helen replied firmly. "In fact, I was thinking of organizing a special dinner here at the mansion next week. Something intimate, just for our closest friends, to celebrate not only the engagement, but also Robert's award." "A dinner?" Camilla repeated, visibly surprised by the suggestion. "Here, are you sure you're up to hosting guests?" "I have Jane and Dora to help me with the preparations. And you, of course. It will be a great opportunity for you to show off your talent as the Alistair hostess." Helen noticed the conflict in Camilla's eyes. She couldn't refuse the offer, without appearing uninterested in the role she so desired. But she clearly suspected the intentions behind the sudden invitation. "That would be wonderful," Camilla finally replied with forced enthusiasm. "I'll start planning tomorrow." Robert returned with the drinks, oblivious to the tension in the air. "To the future," he toasted, raising his glass. "To the Alistair family." "To the family," Camilla repeated with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And to the surprises the future holds." Helen raised her glass, keeping her gaze fixed on Camilla. "To the truths that always find their way to light, sooner or later." That night, after everyone had retired, Helen stayed awake, planning every detail of the upcoming dinner. It wouldn't just be a celebration. It would be the stage for the final act of this charade that had lasted too long. Camilla believed she was in control, manipulating Robert and positioning herself to take over the Alistair empire. What she didn't know was that Helen had transformed her supposed weakness, the wheelchair, the dependence, into a silent weapon of observation. The dinner would be the moment of truth. Helen just needed a few more pieces of evidence, and then Camilla's castle of lies would crumble completely. The next day, Helen summoned Dora and Jane for a private meeting in her room, while Camilla was in the city, supposedly dealing with wedding dress details. "We need to prepare everything for the dinner," Helen explained, with a determination that surprised both employees. "But it won't be an ordinary dinner." "You're planning something," Jane observed, knowing her employer too well to be fooled by the casual tone. "Let's just say it's time for some truths to come out," Helen replied. with a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been seen in a long time. "And I'll need both of your help." Over the next hour, Helen detailed her plan. Dora took meticulous notes, occasionally asking questions to clarify a point. Jane, who had faithfully served the family for decades, nodded in approval. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Dora asked when Helen finished explaining. "The shock might be too great for Mr. Robert. Sometimes—" "Dora, the only way to protect someone we love is through the truth, however painful," Helen replied, looking out the window at the turbulent ocean below. "Robert is strong, stronger than he believes himself to be." When Camilla returned to the mansion late that afternoon, she found Helen in the library, seemingly absorbed in old family albums. "Found anything interesting, Mrs. Alastair?" she asked, sitting in a nearby armchair. "Just memories," Helen replied without looking up. "Photos from Richard's and my wedding. We were thinking of themes for next week's dinner, and I had the idea of celebrating Alastair family traditions. What do you think?" "Traditions?" Camilla repeated with a tense smile. "Sounds appropriate." "Excellent." Helen closed the album softly. "Oh, before I forget, I heard news about the emerald necklace." Camilla's face visibly paled. "The necklace?" "Yes, the one I mentioned the other day. Apparently it was temporarily misplaced, but don't worry, it's already being recovered. It will be here in time for dinner." Helen observed the internal struggle on Camilla's face, the initial panic, followed by a visible effort to maintain composure. "That's good," Camilla finally managed to say, getting up abruptly. "If you'll excuse me, I need to make some calls to organize the dinner." "Of course, dear. We have much to prepare." As Camilla hastily left the library, Helen allowed herself a small smile. The trap was set, and Camilla had just taken the first step into it. The next few days would reveal how far she was willing to go to maintain her charade, and how far Helen would go to protect her son and the legacy Richard had entrusted to her care. The 3 days leading up to the dinner were filled with palpable tension at the Alastair mansion. Camilla moved like a contained hurricane, giving orders to the service staff, discussing the menu with the family's private chef, checking floral arrangements and the table seating. With every detail, Helen suggested, "How about we use the Chinese porcelain that Richard so appreciated? Or the Venetian crystal goblets would be perfect for the occasion." Camilla responded with an increasingly tense smile, her eyes revealing constant calculation. On the eve of the dinner, Helen requested a private meeting with Dr. Oswald Miller, the family lawyer for over 3 decades. When Camilla asked if she could participate, Helen replied with calculated kindness, "It's just bureaucratic matters, dear. Details of the will that might interest you and Robert after the wedding, but nothing urgent. I don't want to take up your time with boring paperwork when you have so many important preparations to supervise." The mention of the will was enough for Camilla not to insist, although Helen noticed how her eyes momentarily sparkled with an interest that contradicted her disinterested tone. "Of course, Mrs. Alastair, I'll be in the dining room finalizing the decor, if you need me." When Dr. Oswald arrived, Helen asked Dora to leave them alone in the office, but to leave the door ajar, enough for anyone passing in the corridor to hear fragments of the conversation, without catching all the details. "We need to discuss the marital clause of Richard's will," Helen began, in a loud, clear voice, as soon as she noticed footsteps in the corridor. "With Robert's wedding approaching, I believe it's time to re-evaluate some provisions." "Certainly," the lawyer responded, opening his folder of documents. Mr. Richard was quite specific about that clause. In the event Robert married, he would immediately receive control of 40% of the company's shares, currently under your guardianship. "That's precisely what I want to modify." "Oswald." Helen paused, listening to the slight change in the footsteps in the corridor. Slower now, clearly trying to catch the conversation. "I've observed changes in Robert in recent months. Hasty decisions, questionable investments, and there's this rush for the wedding. I want a new clause that establishes a probationary period. The shares will only be transferred after 5 years of stable union and upon evaluation by a family council." "That's unusual, Mrs. Alastair," the lawyer commented, genuinely surprised. Mr. Richard was quite emphatic about his wishes. "Richard could not foresee all circumstances, Oswald. As legal executrix of the estate, I have a duty to protect the interests of the family and the company. Prepare the necessary documents," I want them ready for my signature by the end of next week." Helen heard the footsteps quickly retreating down the corridor. The bait had been cast, and Camilla bit exactly as predicted. Less than 20 minutes later, Helen heard the familiar sound of hurried heels on the marble floor, followed by the sound of the front door closing forcefully. From her office window, she saw Camilla getting into her red sports car and driving off at high speed. "She went to meet someone," Dora commented, silently entering the office. "She seemed quite agitated." "I expected that reaction," Helen replied, closing the document folder the lawyer had left on the desk. "Now we need to prepare for the second phase of the plan." Helen knew exactly where, or rather to whom, Camilla had rushed: Talia Davis. The two had been accomplices from the start, that was clear. Talia, most likely, was the financial mind behind the plan, while Camilla executed the social part, charming Robert and positioning herself as the future Mrs. Alistair. What Helen still didn't know for sure was the full extent of the scheme and how much Talia knew about the family's business. That night, during dinner, Robert noticed Camilla's absence. "She called saying she had to help a friend with an emergency," he explained, clearly disappointed. "Something about a problem in her apartment, a leak. She apologized for not being able to have dinner with us." Helen nodded, pretending to believe the excuse. "It's a shame. But tomorrow will be an important day with the dinner. Perhaps it's better that she resolves any pending issues beforehand." "You're right," Robert agreed, though still seeming restless. "Speaking of which, I need to tell you something new. I invited Paul Anderson and his wife to dinner. With the merger almost finalized, I thought it would be a good gesture." Helen felt a pang of concern. Paul Anderson was a respected businessman, owner of one of the country's largest technology companies. The merger with Alistair Construction would represent a significant advance in the family's business, expanding its operations into the smart construction sector. It was not in Helen's plans for outsiders to be present during the confrontation she was planning. "Are you sure that's a good idea, son?" "The dinner was meant to be intimate, family-oriented." "Paul is practically family now, Mother. Besides, he's been a great supporter of my vision for the company's future." Helen perceived Robert's genuine enthusiasm and did not have the heart to contradict him. Perhaps it was even better this way, respectable witnesses to what was about to happen. "In that case, I'll ask Jane to set 2 more places at the table." Later, alone in her room, Helen reviewed every detail of her plan. The confrontation would need to be carefully orchestrated, revealing enough to open Robert's eyes, but not so devastating as to publicly humiliate him. Her son deserved the truth, but he also deserved dignity. For the first time since the supposed accident, Helen allowed herself to get out of the wheelchair when she was completely alone. Her steps were hesitant after weeks of feigned immobility, but firm enough for what she needed to do. She walked slowly to the large closet mirror and observed her reflection. Grey hair still elegantly pinned, upright posture despite the fatigue, eyes as determined as they had always been. "Richard," she murmured to the silence of the room, "I hope I'm doing the right thing." The morning of the dinner brought a surprisingly blue sky to Cape Coral, as if nature wanted to offer a perfect setting for the drama that would unfold. Helen woke early, feeling a calm that contrasted with the agitation that would soon fill the house. Camilla appeared around 10 in the morning, with noticeable dark circles under her hurried makeup, and a smile that seemed more like a grimace. "Good morning, Mrs. Alistair," she greeted, entering the room with a breakfast tray that had clearly been prepared by Jane. "How are you feeling today? Big day, isn't it?" "Good morning, Camilla. I'm feeling enlightened," Helen replied, accepting the cup of coffee. "Is your friend well? Robert mentioned you had to help her yesterday." "Oh, yes. All resolved, fortunately. Just a small leak that could have turned into a big problem." Helen nodded, noticing how Camilla avoided eye contact as she spoke. Problems have that habit, don't they? They start small, almost imperceptible, and before we know it, they've caused irreparable damage. Camilla seemed to catch the double meaning of the words, as her hand trembled slightly when placing the tray on the nightstand. "Well, the important thing is to identify them in time. Speaking of time, I have 1,000 things to supervise before dinner. The florists arrive at noon, the chef wants to discuss the final menu details, and I still need to get properly ready." "Don't let me detain you." Helen replied softly. "I'm sure everything will be perfect." As soon as Camilla left, Dora entered the room carrying a small carved wooden box. "Mr. Paul Harrison just delivered this," she informed, placing the box on Helen's bed. "He said he managed to retrieve it this morning, as you requested." Helen slowly opened the box, revealing the emerald and diamond necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. The stones sparkled as always, seemingly untouched, but the fact that they had been used as collateral for a loan without her knowledge was a violation that could not be ignored. "Put it in the safe for now. Dora, tonight it will play an important role." The following hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. The mansion was transformed to receive guests. Tropical flower arrangements strategically decorated the rooms. Scented candles created a welcoming atmosphere. The family's antique silverware gleamed under the soft light of the chandeliers. Camilla supervised everything with frenetic energy, as if to compensate for her absence the day before. Around 4 in the afternoon, Robert returned from a business meeting carrying a small velvet box. "Mother," he said, sitting beside Helen's wheelchair in the winter garden, "I wanted your opinion on this before I give it to Camilla tonight." Helen opened the box to find a dazzling engagement ring, a diamond solitaire surrounded by small sapphires, set in platinum. "It's the ring grandmother gave you when you announced your engagement to Dad," Robert explained, with an emotional sparkle in his eyes. "I had it restored and added the sapphires, which are Camilla's favorite stones. I want to officially formalize the engagement tonight during dinner." Helen felt a knot in her throat. The ring was a family heirloom, a symbol of true love passed down through generations. To see it transformed to please Camilla, knowing the young woman's true intentions, caused her almost physical pain. "It's a very beautiful gesture. Son," she managed to say, closing the box delicately, "are you sure you want to do this tonight? With so many people present, I thought you'd be happy," Robert replied, confused by his mother's restrained reaction. "We always said family traditions are important." Helen knew this was not the time to reveal the truth. The confrontation had to happen as planned, with all evidence at hand. "And they are, dear. I'm just surprised, that's all. The ring is beautiful, and I'm sure Camilla will love it." At 7 in the evening, the first guests began to arrive. In addition to Paul Anderson and his wife Marcia, Helen had invited some close family friends, Dr. Oswald Miller and his wife, the Adams couple, Veronica, who had recommended Dora and her husband Edward, and Dr. Paul Marshall himself, who had treated her injury. These were people Helen had known for decades, who had stood by her side in the most difficult moments, and who, she believed, would be reliable witnesses to what was about to happen. Camilla appeared stunning in an emerald green dress that, Helen noted with irony, perfectly matched the necklace that had been used as collateral to finance who knows what. Her smile was radiant as she greeted the guests, introducing herself as Robert's fiancée and making a point of mentioning plans for the wedding that would unite 2 important families. Dinner began promptly at 8, with everyone duly seated around the large mahogany table in the main dining room. Helen, at the head, had Robert on her right and Paul Anderson on her left. Camilla sat next to Robert, strategically positioned to be the center of attention. The first part of the meal proceeded without incident. Pleasant conversations about the weather, the beauty of Cape Coral, Robert's recent award. Camilla shone socially, as always, charming the guests with stories about her design projects and her ideas for modernizing some aspects of the mansion, while maintaining its historical charm, of course. It was during dessert, an elaborate chocolate trifle with red berries, a traditional family recipe, that Helen decided it was time. She asked Jane to bring a specific bottle of champagne, the one Richard saved for truly special occasions. "Before we toast," Helen announced when the glasses were served, "I would like to make an announcement." All eyes turned to her, expectant. Camilla seemed especially tense, her fingers discreetly squeezing the edge of the table. "As you all know, I suffered an accident a few weeks ago that limited my mobility," Helen continued, her voice clear and firm. "During this period of apparent fragility, I had the opportunity to observe many things that perhaps I would not have noticed under normal circumstances." Robert frowned, clearly confused by the turn of the conversation. Camilla maintained a fixed smile, but her eyes revealed growing alarm. "I discovered, for example, that not everyone who presents themselves as family friends truly has our best interests at heart." A heavy silence fell over the table. Paul Anderson cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Mother, I don't think this is the moment," Robert began, but Helen raised her hand, signaling for silence. "It is exactly the moment, son, because tonight is about truths, about removing masks." Helen made a discreet signal to Dora, who approached carrying the carved wooden box that contained the emerald necklace. "Do you recognize this, Camilla?" Helen asked as Dora opened the box, revealing the jewel to everyone present. Camilla's face visibly paled. "It's your grandmother's necklace, Mrs. Alistair, the one we mentioned a few days ago." "Exactly. A necklace that, curiously, was found in a jewelry store in South Beach, left as collateral for an $800,000 loan. A loan requested by someone using your documents, but identifying herself as Talia Davis. Do you know anyone by that name, Camilla?" The silence in the room was so dense that one could hear the ticking of the old clock in the corner. Robert looked from Camilla to Helen, incredulous. "This is absurd," Camilla finally managed to say, her trembling voice betraying her nervousness. "There must be some mistake. I would never... There is no mistake," Helen calmly replied, making another signal to Dora, who handed her a blue folder. "I have here detailed reports from the insurance investigator. Photographs, transaction records. This was not an isolated incident, Camilla. In recent months, several family jewels mysteriously disappeared, always reappearing in different establishments, always used as collateral for substantial loans." Robert seemed stunned, unable to process what he was hearing. "This can't be true. Camilla would never do something like that." "Not only did she do it, son, but she planned much more," Helen continued, now opening the folder to reveal photographs and documents. "While pretending to care for me after my supposed accident, Camilla maintained constant contact with Talia, discussing plans to access the family's money as soon as the wills clause came into effect after your marriage." "What clause?" Paul Anderson asked, unable to contain his curiosity despite the evident discomfort. "The clause that would automatically transfer 40% of the company's shares to Robert immediately after his marriage," Helen explained, without taking her eyes off Camilla, who was now visibly trembling. Shares that Camilla hoped she could influence Robert to sell or use as collateral for investments in... What was it? "Oh yes, Miami properties." The guests exchanged shocked glances. Dr. Veronica Adams covered her mouth, while her husband shook his head in disbelief. "This is ridiculous," Camilla finally exploded, getting up from her chair with such force that she almost knocked it over. "I'm being slandered, humiliated in front of everyone. Robert, you're not going to allow this, are you?" Robert seemed in shock, his gaze alternating between his mother and his fiancée, desperately searching for some sign that it was all a terrible mistake. "Mother, are you absolutely sure of these accusations? Because this is devastating." Helen nodded gravely. "I have all the necessary evidence, son. Recordings of phone conversations, bank records, testimonies. Dora has kept a detailed record of everything since she started working with us. And there's more." It was at this moment that Helen decided to deliver the final blow. Slowly and deliberately, she placed her hands on the arms of the wheelchair and stood up, completely erect before the astonished guests. The room erupted in exclamations of surprise. Dr. Paul Marshall stood up, dumbfounded. "Helen, you can walk. But what about the spinal injury?" "There was never any injury, Paul," Helen replied, her firm posture contradicting weeks of feigned fragility. "It was an act, a test to verify Camilla's true character." "A test?" Robert repeated, incredulous. "You pretended to be incapacitated for weeks as a test? To protect you, son. To reveal the true face of the woman you plan to share your life with." Helen turned to Camilla, who seemed on the verge of collapse. "A woman who, when she believed I was vulnerable, revealed her true character, impatient with my requests, disdainful when she thought no one was listening, actively planning how to use you and your inheritance for her own ends. This is madness," Camilla stammered, backing towards the door. "You're all crazy. Robert, please, you can't believe this." Robert remained silent, his face a mask of pain and confusion. Finally, he took the small velvet box he had shown Helen earlier from his pocket. "I was going to give you this today," he said, his voice almost inaudible. "My grandmother's ring, restored especially for you. Camilla looked at the box, then at Robert, and finally at Helen, who stood unwavering. "This isn't over," Camilla hissed, her mask of sweetness completely abandoned. "You don't know who you're dealing with, you manipulative old woman. I have powerful friends, connections you can't even imagine." "I'm sure you do, Camilla," Helen calmly replied. "But they're not here now, are they? And the people who are here, trusted friends, respectable professionals, have witnessed your true character. I think it's time for you to go." For a moment it seemed Camilla would advance on Helen. Her eyes blazed with hatred and her hands were clenched into fists. But looking around and realizing the impossible situation, she opted for a dramatic exit. "You will regret this, Helen Alistair," she declared, heading for the door. She paused briefly before Robert, who still held the ring box. "And you, my love, will realize the mistake you made. When that happens, it will be too late." With these words, Camilla left the dining room, the sound of her heels echoing on the marble floor, followed by the violent slam of the main door. A deafening silence fell over the room. The guests seemed frozen in their seats, unable to fully process the drama they had witnessed. It was Dr. Oswald who finally broke the silence. "Helen, I don't know what to say. That was extraordinary." "It was necessary," Helen replied simply, returning to her seat no longer in the wheelchair, but in the chair that had been prepared for her at the head of the table. "I apologize to all of you for involving you in this unpleasant episode. But I needed reliable witnesses." Robert had still not moved, staring fixedly at the door through which Camilla had left. He looked like someone who had just been punched in the stomach, trying to catch his breath. "Son," Helen called softly, extending her hand to him. "I know this is hard to accept, but everything I did was to protect you." "Protect me," Robert repeated, finally turning his gaze to his mother. There was hurt in his eyes, but also a glimmer of understanding. "By pretending to be incapacitated? By staging this scene?" "When I received the anonymous message about Camilla, I could have simply confronted you with my suspicions," Helen explained. "But you were so in love, so sure of your choice. Words would not have been enough. I needed irrefutable proof. And the accident? Your fall down the stairs. Staged." "With the help of Dr. Paul," Helen admitted, looking at the doctor, who nodded in confirmation. "It was extreme, I know. But what was at stake was extremely important. Your future. The future of the company your father built. The legacy of the Alistair family." Paul Anderson, who had remained silent until then, cleared his throat to get attention. "If I may say so, despite the unusual circumstances, I cannot help but admire your determination. Mrs. Alistair, few people would go to such lengths to protect what they love. Any mother would do the same." "Mr. Anderson," Helen replied, her gaze still fixed on Robert. "At least any mother who truly cared." The merger, Robert suddenly remembered, seeming to awaken from a trance. "Paul, I'm so sorry about all this. I'll understand if you want to reconsider." "Not at all," Paul Anderson interrupted him firmly. "Our partnership is based on mutual trust and professional respect, not on personal circumstances. The merger will proceed as planned. That is, if you're still interested." "Of course." "More than ever," Robert confirmed, seeming to find something solid to cling to amidst the emotional turmoil. Slowly, the atmosphere in the room began to change. The initial shock gave way to a collective understanding of what they had witnessed. Veronica Adams was the first to suggest that perhaps the guests should withdraw, giving the family space to process the events. "No, please stay," Helen asked. "I've already ruined dinner with this unexpected outcome. At least allow us to share dessert and champagne. We still have something to celebrate. The integrity of the Alistair family remains intact." Gradually the tension eased. Hesitant conversations resumed. Glasses were raised in restrained toasts. Helen watched Robert with a heavy heart. She knew he would need time to process not only Camilla's betrayal, but also the extent of his own mother's actions. When the guests finally left, around midnight, Helen and Robert were left alone in the living room. The silence between them weighed like a wet blanket. "Why didn't you tell me your suspicions from the beginning?" Robert finally asked, his voice heavy with emotional exhaustion. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was just an overprotective mother, unable to accept the woman her son chose?" Robert didn't answer immediately, recognizing the truth in Helen's words. Still, he continued, all this staging, the wheelchair, the medications, it was so elaborate. I needed to see who Camilla truly was when she thought no one was watching, Helen explained, approaching her son. And it worked. She showed her true colors, her impatience, her disdain, her conversations with Talia about money and plans for after the wedding. Talia, Robert repeated the name, frowning. Who is she, anyway? From what I could gather, an old college friend of Camilla's from design school. It seems the two have collaborated on several projects over the years. Projects that usually involve wealthy and vulnerable men. Robert let out a bitter laugh. And I was just the next target. The lovesick fool too blind to see through the charade. You weren't a fool, son, Helen said firmly, holding Robert's hands in hers. You were someone capable of seeing the best in people, of believing in love. That's not foolishness. It's a rare and precious quality, a quality that Richard deeply admired in you. Hearing his father's name, Robert's eyes filled with suppressed tears. What would Dad say about all this? About how easily I was deceived? He would say what he always said, that stumbling is part of the journey, but what matters is how we get up afterward. Helen squeezed her son's hands tighter. And you will get up, Robert. Stronger, wiser. The pain will pass, though now it seems impossible. At that moment, as the waves crashed on the rocks below and the moonlight bathed the Alistair mansion, mother and son shared a silence that spoke more than words. The storm had passed, leaving significant damage, but the foundation remained intact. And as Helen well knew, with solid foundations, anything could be rebuilt. 3 months had passed since that fateful night at the Alistair mansion. Life had found a new rhythm, a modified normality that bore the scars of recent events, but also the first signs of healing. Helen returned to her usual routine, morning walks around the property, board meetings of the foundation she managed on behalf of the family, occasional dinners with close friends. The wheelchair was discreetly donated to a community hospital in Key West, along with other equipment that had been part of the elaborate staging. Dora, who had proven her worth far beyond the duties of a caregiver, accepted Helen's invitation to remain at the mansion, now as her personal assistant. Her loyalty and discretion during the most tense moments had demonstrated a character that Helen deeply valued. Furthermore, as Helen confided to Jane, there is a wisdom in that woman that is not learned in books or universities. Robert, for his part, plunged into work with an intensity that worried Helen. The merger with Paul Anderson's company was progressing well, transforming Alistair Construction into a powerhouse in the emerging market of smart buildings. Full days in the office, frequent trips to New York City and Washington, D.C., meetings that extended late into the night. It was as if Robert was determined not to leave a single moment empty for reflections or memories. On a particularly warm February afternoon, as Helen organized some documents in the office, Jane entered with an apprehensive expression. "Mrs. Alistair, there's a young woman outside asking to speak with you. She says it's important." "A young woman? Who?" "She wouldn't identify herself. She just said she has information about Miss Camilla." Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. Camilla's name had become almost a taboo in the mansion, rarely mentioned in recent weeks. "Where is she now?" "In the front garden. I asked her to wait there. Dora is keeping an eye on her." Helen considered her options. She could simply refuse to receive the mysterious visitor, but her intuition, the same that had warned her about Camilla, told her there was something important to be discovered. "Tell her I'll receive her in the veranda room. And stay close, Jane. We don't know who she is or what she really wants." Minutes later, Helen entered the room that opened onto the veranda overlooking the ocean. Sitting rigidly in one of the armchairs was a young woman of approximately 30 with short brown hair, simple but tasteful clothes. Upon seeing Helen, she immediately stood up, nervousness evident in every movement. "Mrs. Alistair, thank you for receiving me. My name is Marian Gardner." "How can I help you, Miss Gardner?" Helen asked, maintaining a safe distance and a neutral tone. "Actually, I came to offer you help," Marian replied, clutching the strap of her purse tightly. "Or perhaps closure, I'm not sure what to call it. I worked for Camilla Miller for almost 2 years, as an assistant in her design studio." Helen gestured to the armchair for Marian to sit down again, while she herself took a seat in the opposite chair. "Please continue." "Camilla fired me 3 weeks ago without notice or valid justification," Marian explained, bitterness evident in her voice. She just said she was restructuring the business and no longer needed me. The truth is, I knew too much. Knew too much about what exactly? About her scheme with Talia Davis, about how they select targets wealthy and influential men, preferably heirs or established businessmen, about how Camilla approaches them, creates a perfect persona tailored to win them over, while Talia manages the financial aspects behind the scenes. Marion paused, taking a deep breath. Your son wasn't the first, Mrs. Alistair, nor will he be the last. Helen maintained her composure, though she felt a mixture of vindication and horror. Her suspicions had been correct from the start, but the extent of the scheme seemed greater than she had imagined. Why are you telling me this now, Miss Gardner? Because it's the right thing to do. And because... Marion hesitated, as if weighing the words that followed. Because Camilla and Talia are about to implement Phase 2 of their original plan. Phase 2? Helen repeated, feeling a chill. Explain yourself. The plan was never just to marry your son and access the family money through the will. That was just the beginning. Phase 2 involves revenge. Marion opened her purse and took out an envelope. I found these documents when I was clearing my desk at the office. They are emails between Camilla and Talia, discussing how they will destroy the Alistairs after the dinner fiasco. Helen accepted the envelope carefully, as if it might contain something toxic. Inside were printed copies of email exchanges, all dated within the last few weeks. Her eyes quickly scanned the texts, catching alarming phrases. A contact at the newspaper is already prepared to receive the exclusive story about how the Alistair matriarch manipulated her own son. The lawyer confirmed that we can sue for defamation, moral damages, and psychological harassment. The investigator is almost done gathering information about the company's financial operations in the 1990s. If we find what we suspect, they'll be finished. Helen felt her mouth go dry. These women were not just hurt or with wounded pride. They were systematically planning an attack on the Alistair family's reputation, possibly using distorted information about old company transactions during Richard's management. Why should I believe you, Miss Gardner? How do I know this isn't part of their plan? Because I also have a lot to lose, Mrs. Alistair. Marion looked Helen directly. My name and signature are on several documents that pass through Camilla's office. If she falls, I could fall with her. I'm here because I want distance from them and their schemes. And because I believe there are limits, even for ambitious people. Helen studied the young woman's face, looking for signs of deception. There was fear there, certainly, and resentment, but also a sincerity that didn't seem rehearsed. How much time do we have before they put this plan into action? The newspaper article is scheduled for next Sunday. The lawsuit should be filed the following Monday. As for the investigation into the company, I'm not sure. Talia mentioned something about being close to a significant discovery. Helen nodded slowly, her mind already working on the implications and possible countermeasures. I understand. And what do you expect in return for this information, Miss Gardner? Marion seemed surprised by the question. I'm not asking for anything in return. Perhaps just the assurance that, if all this comes to light, you will remember that I warned you. That I was not involved in Phase 2. If you're telling the truth, you have my word that your name will be preserved. Helen stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. Jane will show you out. If you remember any more relevant details, leave your contact with her. After Marion left, Helen remained on the veranda for long moments, watching the turbulent ocean below. The waves crashed on the rocks with hypnotic violence, reminding her that even the most solid foundations can be tested by the relentless force of nature, or in this case, by the calculated malice of people determined to destroy what they could not possess. Her first reaction was to call Robert, but she restrained the impulse. Her son was still processing Camilla's betrayal. Knowing she planned an elaborate revenge would only add to his pain. No, this was a situation Helen needed to manage alone, at least initially. Determined, she went to the office and picked up the phone. The first call was to Dr. Oswald Miller. Oswald, I need you to come to the mansion tonight. Yes, it's urgent. And bring all documents related to the company's operations during Richard's management. Especially from the 1990s, we need to review everything with a fine-tooth comb. The second call was to Paul Harrison, the investigator who had recovered the emerald necklace. Paul, I have another job for you. I need complete information about Camilla Miller and Talia Davis. Everything, financial history, background, connections, previous cases similar to what happened here. And be discreet. They cannot know we are watching. The third and most difficult call was to Veronica Adams. As director of one of the state's leading hospitals and a respected figure in social circles, Veronica had connections that could be crucial. Veronica, dear, I need your help. Do you remember the incident with Camilla? Well, it seems the matter is not as closed as we imagined. Over the next few hours, Helen established what she mentally called her operations center in the mansion's office. Dora was tasked with creating a system to organize all the information that would begin to arrive. Jane prepared an adjacent room for the meetings that would take place in the coming days. The battle Helen thought she had won 3 months ago was in fact just beginning. When Robert arrived home, it was past 9 in the evening. He looked exhausted, carrying a folder full of merger-related documents. Helen watched him from the office doorway, her heart heavy with worry. Her son had lost weight, and the deep dark circles under his eyes revealed sleepless nights. "Working late again?" she asked softly, as he placed the folder on a side table in the entrance hall. "Paul has big plans for expansion in Washington, D.C., Robert replied, trying to sound animated, but his voice betrayed his fatigue. "I spent the day reviewing land proposals. You need to rest, son. Working yourself to exhaustion won't erase memories faster." Robert seemed momentarily surprised by Helen's frankness, but then his shoulders slumped in surrender. "Is it that obvious?" "To a mother, it always is." Helen approached, gently touching her son's arm. "Come, Jane has prepared that risotto you love. Afterward we can talk. There are developments you need to know." During dinner, Helen kept the conversation light, asking about the technical details of the merger, commenting on the unusually warm February weather, mentioning an art exhibition she would like to visit on the weekend. Only when Jane served coffee on the veranda, under the starry sky, did she address the matter that hung between them. "We had a visitor today," Helen began, choosing her words carefully. "A young woman named Marian Gardner. She worked for Camilla." Robert's body visibly tensed at the mention of his ex-fiancée's name. "What did she want?" "To warn us. Apparently, Camilla and her friend Talia are not satisfied just with having been discovered. They are planning to retaliate." Helen explained the details of Marian's visit, showing Robert the printed emails, sharing her concerns about the investigation that might be underway regarding the company's old operations. "But this is absurd," Robert exclaimed after examining the documents. "Dad managed the company with total transparency. All contracts were audited, all transactions documented." "Yes, but you know how the disinformation game works, son. They don't need real facts to create a damaging narrative. Just plant the seed of doubt, distort information, take data out of context. The sensationalist press will do the rest." Robert ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Richard that for a moment Helen felt as if she were reliving a scene from decades ago. "What are we going to do?" "We need to get ahead of them. I've already started building our defense. Oswald is reviewing all the company's legal documentation. Paul Harrison is investigating Camilla and Talia's history, looking for patterns and potential previous victims. And Veronica is mobilizing her contacts in the press to find out which newspaper might be involved. And what about me? How can I help?" Helen smiled for the first time that day. This was the reaction she expected, not despair or self-pity, but a willingness to face the problem head-on. "I need you to talk to Paul Anderson. If they really plan to attack the company's reputation, the merger could be affected. He needs to be prepared, know that this might happen, understand that there is no real basis for any accusations that may arise." Robert nodded, determination replacing tiredness in his eyes. "I'll talk to him personally tomorrow. There's one more thing, son," Helen added hesitantly. "We need to consider the possibility of a public counteroffensive." "What do you mean?" "If they really go through with this plan, it won't be enough just to defend ourselves. We'll need to expose who they really are, what they really do. Show that we are not helpless victims, but a family that does not tolerate threats or blackmail." Robert considered the idea for a few moments, his face serious. "Does that mean making public everything that happened? Camilla's charade, the jewelry scheme, your strategy with the wheelchair?" "Yes, We will have to tell our version before they completely distort the story. It will be uncomfortable, even embarrassing, but the truth, even imperfect, is our best defense. The following days were a race against time. The Alistair mansion transformed into a center of strategy and intelligence. Dr. Oswald practically moved into the office, reviewing documents until late hours. Paul Harrison sent daily reports on his discoveries about Camilla and Talia, each more revealing than the last. We found a definite pattern, he explained during a meeting on Wednesday night. In the last 5 years, they've done this at least 2 other times. A businessman in Richmond, owner of a luxury car dealership chain, and a banker in Chicago. The modus operandi is always the same. Camilla approaches, builds a relationship, while Talia manages the financial part behind the scenes. And what happened in those cases? Helen asked. The Richmond businessman discovered the scheme before the wedding like you did. He ended up making a quiet settlement to avoid scandal. As for the banker, Paul hesitated, he married Camilla. 3 months later, he was divorced and had lost almost 30 million in questionable transfers and failed investments. Helen and Robert exchanged worried glances. The situation was even more serious than they had imagined. There's more, Paul continued. I managed to locate Talia Davis. She's staying in a flat in South Beach, registered in the name of an offshore company based in the Cayman Islands. And guess who visited her last night? Victor Ashton, editor-in-chief of The Herald. The Herald? Robert repeated, incredulous. But they are known for serious, award-winning investigative journalism, which makes them the perfect vehicle for an attack on our reputation, Helen observed. If it were just any tabloid, no one would care. But The Herald. We need to talk to someone inside there, Robert decided. Someone who can give us more information about this alleged article they're preparing. I'm already working on that, Paul assured. I have a contact in the newspaper's finance department. We're setting up a meeting for tomorrow. On Friday, 2 days before the scheduled publication date of the article, came the first major twist. Veronica Adams arrived at the mansion early in the afternoon, bringing with her a nervous-looking young man who introduced himself as Luke Fisher, a journalist from The Herald. Luke worked with me as a volunteer at the hospital during college, Veronica explained. When I mentioned I was concerned about a potential sensationalist article involving close friends, he decided he needed to talk to us. The article is being prepared by Victor personally, Luke explained, accepting the cup of coffee Jane offered him. He doesn't usually get directly involved in editing, but he took this case as special. He's keeping everything secret. Only a small circle has access to the content. And what do you know about this content? Helen asked directly. Not much. Just fragments I heard in conversations. Apparently, it involves accusations of fraud in public tenders during the company's expansion in the 1990s, as well as an exclusive exposé about how the Alistair family manipulates people and situations to protect its interests. Luke hesitated, seeming uncomfortable. There's also something about you having feigned a disability to test the loyalty of close people, in an almost unhealthy way. Helen maintained her composure, though she felt the impact of the words. They were distorting her strategy to protect Robert, turning it into something sinister, calculating. I understand. And these accusations of fraud in tenders, is there any concrete evidence being presented? Not that I know of. It seems to be based mainly on the testimony of a source who claims to have compromising documents, but as far as I know, these documents have not been independently verified by anyone in the newsroom other than Victor. Robert, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward. Why are you telling us this, Luke? You're risking your job. The young journalist adjusted his glasses nervously. Because that's not how journalism should work. Serious accusations require rigorous verification, multiple sources, the right of reply. What's happening seems more like a personal vendetta than investigative reporting. And he hesitated again. Because Veronica briefly told me your version, and something just doesn't add up in the narrative they're building at the newspaper. Helen exchanged a meaningful glance with Robert and Veronica. This could be the unexpected ally they needed. Luke, Helen began, carefully weighing her words, what would you say if we offered you the true story? Documents, testimonies, concrete proof that your intuition is correct, that the newspaper is being manipulated for a defamation campaign. I'd say I'd need to see that evidence for myself, Luke replied after a moment of reflection. And that if it's convincing, I would have an ethical duty to at the very least warn others in the newsroom about what's happening. That's all we ask. A fair evaluation. In the following hours, Helen, Robert, and Dr. Oswald presented Luke with all the documents they had gathered. Paul Harrison's reports on Camilla and Talia's previous schemes, records of jewelry used as collateral for unauthorized loans, emails revealed by Marion Gardner detailing the revenge plan, and, most importantly, complete documentation of all public tenders won by Alistair Construction in the 1990s, with compliance certifications issued by independent auditors. As you can see, Dr. Oswald explained, pointing to a specific pile of documents, we not only followed all legal procedures, but often went beyond what was required in terms of transparency. Richard Alistair was a pioneer in practices that only became standard in the industry years later. Luke examined the documents meticulously, occasionally taking notes or photos with his cell phone. His face, initially skeptical, gradually showed signs of concern and finally, determination. This is much more substantial than any evidence I've seen mentioned at the newspaper, he finally declared. But we still have a problem. Victor is completely committed to this article. He has already announced internally that it will be Sunday's cover story. Then we need to go above him, Helen decided. Who owns the newspaper now? National Media Group. The CEO is Charles Dawson. Helen smiled, an expression that mixed relief and determination. Charles and I served together on the board of the New York Cultural Foundation a few years ago. I think it's time to make a call. On Saturday morning, as the sun rose over Cape Coral, Helen, Robert, Dr. Oswald, and Luke Fisher were received at Charles Dawson's penthouse in Miami Beach. The CEO of the National Media Group, a man in his 60s with grey hair and a penetrating gaze, listened attentively as Luke explained his concerns about the article about to be published. I'm not suggesting editorial interference, sir, the young journalist concluded, only that there be an additional review of the facts before publication, given the seriousness of the accusations and the potential impact on the reputation of respected individuals and institutions. Charles watched Luke for a moment, before turning his attention to Helen. I've always admired your family, Helen. Richard was a man of principles, and from what I've observed, Robert follows the same path. But understand, I cannot simply cancel an article based solely on an allegation of bad faith. We are not asking for cancellation, Charles, Helen replied calmly. We are asking for diligence, independent verification, the journalism that the Herald has always upheld. Charles considered the words for a few moments, tapping his fingers on the coffee table. Finally, he made a decision. Luke, I want you and 2 senior editors, choose people you trust, to review all the material related to this article. Documents, sources, everything. You have until 6 this evening. If you find inconsistencies or evidence that the newspaper is being used for a personal vendetta, the publication will be postponed for a deeper investigation. He turned to Helen and Robert. That's the best I can offer. It's more than enough, Helen assured, extending her hand to seal the agreement. Thank you, Charles. The following hours were filled with tense waiting at the Alistair mansion. Helen alternated between periods of meditative calm on the veranda, watching the ocean, and moments of feverish energy, checking her phone every few minutes. Robert had gone to the office for an emergency meeting with Paul Anderson, explaining the situation and assuring him that everything was being done to protect the reputation of both companies. It was almost 7 in the evening when the phone finally rang. Helen answered on the first ring, immediately putting it on speakerphone so that Dr. Oswald, Dora, and Jane, who were waiting in the living room, could hear. Helen? It's Charles. I just came out of a 3-hour meeting with our editorial team. His voice sounded serious, but with a touch of, could it be relief? The article has been cancelled. A collective sigh of relief echoed through the room. Helen closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of pure gratitude. What happened? She asked when she regained her voice. Luke and the team I assigned found serious inconsistencies in the reporting. The main source, which I presume to be this Talia Davis, provided documents that, upon closer analysis, showed clear signs of tampering. Furthermore, when confronted, Victor could not satisfactorily explain why he did not follow our standard verification protocols. Charles paused. He has been temporarily suspended while we conduct an internal investigation. And what about them, Camilla and Talia? I don't know what you're planning, Helen, and perhaps it's best that I don't know. But I can tell you that at least in the pages of the Herald, they will not find a platform for any defamatory campaign. Of that you can be sure. After hanging up, Helen remained silent for a few moments, absorbing the impact of the victory they had achieved. An important battle had been won, but the war was not yet completely over. And now? Dora asked, expressing the collective thought. Now, Helen replied, getting up with renewed determination, we go on the offensive. On Monday morning, while Camilla and Talia probably expected to see devastating headlines about the Alistair family, they were surprised by a press conference convened by Helen and Robert in the auditorium of the company's headquarters in New York City. Before journalists from various outlets, including a representative from the Herald, not coincidentally, Luke Fisher, Helen took the floor. I thank everyone for their presence. We have called this press conference to clarify situations that, until now, we have treated as private matters, but which recent events compel us to make public. With clarity and dignity, Helen recounted the events of recent months. How Camilla had approached Robert with questionable intentions. How Helen, suspicious, had devised a strategy to test the true character of her future daughter-in-law. How they discovered the scheme involving family jewels and unauthorized loans. And finally, how Camilla and her accomplice, Talia Davis, had attempted to orchestrate a defamation campaign against the family after being unmasked. We do not seek revenge or retaliation, Helen concluded. Only the truth and the protection of a legacy built with hard work and integrity over decades. Richard Alistair, my late husband and founder of this company, used to say that the truth can be painful, but it always sets you free. Today we choose the freedom of truth. Robert then took the microphone, his posture reflecting a confidence that had been absent in recent months. Any person or entity who has been a victim of similar schemes promoted by Camilla Miller and Talia Davis can contact us. We will provide legal assistance and support through the Alistair Foundation. It is time to interrupt this cycle of fraud and manipulation. The media reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, social media buzzed with the story, while behavioral experts and lawyers were called to comment on the case on television shows. The term Helen's test began to circulate, referring to the strategy of feigning vulnerability to reveal true intentions. The next morning, the Richmond businessman who had previously been targeted by Camilla gave an exclusive interview, corroborating the Alistair's story and adding details about his own experience. By the end of the week, 3 more men had come forward, reporting encounters with the duo that followed the same pattern. Meanwhile, Camilla and Talia had disappeared from circulation. The design studio in South Beach was closed, with a "closed for renovations" sign on the door. The flat where Talia was staying had been hastily vacated. Rumors suggested they had left the country, possibly heading to Portugal or the United States. 2 weeks after the press conference, Helen found herself back on the veranda of her mansion, watching the sunset paint the ocean in golden and orange hues. Robert approached silently, bringing 2 glasses of wine. "A penny for your thoughts," he said, handing one of the glasses to his mother. Helen smiled, accepting the wine. "I was thinking about how quickly things change. A few months ago you were about to get married. Then we faced a crisis that threatened to destroy everything we built. And now we're here stronger," Robert completed, sitting beside her. "Wiser too, I hope." "Definitely wiser." Helen raised her glass in a silent toast. "Your father would be proud of how you handled all this, Robert." "I had a good teacher." Robert watched the horizon for a moment. "You know, all this time you never asked how I felt about Camilla, about the loss." "I didn't need to ask. I could see it in your eyes, in how you immersed yourself in work, in how you avoided certain topics." Helen turned to face him directly. "But perhaps it's time to talk about it." Robert took a deep breath, contemplating the amber liquid in his glass. At first it was like a physical blow. Not just the betrayal, but realizing how easily I was manipulated. How I didn't see through the charade. She was very good at what she did, son. Professional, one might say. Yes, but even so, I questioned my own judgment, my ability to evaluate people. And there was the shame, too, of almost having brought someone like that into our family, into the company. Helen nodded, understanding. "And now?" How do you feel? Now, Robert considered the question for a few moments. Now I feel gratitude for having been saved from a greater disaster, for having you by my side, willing to do whatever was necessary to protect me, even if it meant taking on a role that many would judge as extreme. I would do it all again, Helen declared without hesitation. I know. And that's both frightening and comforting at the same time. Robert smiled, a genuine smile Helen hadn't seen in a long time. But I think I also learned something important, that trusting isn't weakness. The mistake wasn't trusting Camilla. The mistake was trusting blindly, ignoring warning signs, being uncomfortable with questioning. That, my son, is true wisdom. Helen gently touched Robert's hand. Your father used to say that trust is like fine crystal, precious and transparent, but it must be handled with care and respect for its fragility. They remained in comfortable silence for some time, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Below, the waves continued their eternal dialogue with the rocks, sometimes gentle, sometimes stormy, but always moving, always transforming. "And what about you, Mother?" Robert finally asked. "This whole situation must have been even harder for you. Feigning an accident, living in a wheelchair for weeks, facing the prospect of seeing our reputation destroyed." Helen reflected for a moment. "Do you know what kept me strong throughout all this time? The certainty that we were on the right side. Not perfect, not infallible, just right in our intention to protect what is true and valuable." A gentle breeze blew from the ocean, bringing with it the characteristic smell of salt and sea air. Helen breathed deeply, feeling a peace that had been absent for a long time. "How about we resume our Sunday dinners?" she suggested suddenly. "Like we used to when you were younger. We could invite Paul and Marcia Anderson, the Adams, maybe even Luke. He proved to be a young man of exceptional character." "I'd love that," Robert replied with genuine enthusiasm. "We could start this very Sunday." "Perfect. I'll ask Jane to prepare that feijoada you love so much." As night advanced over Cape Coral, mother and son continued talking, planning, reconnecting in a way that the crisis had paradoxically made possible. The Alistair mansion, which had witnessed so much drama and tension in recent months, seemed once again to settle as a home in the true sense of the word, a place of truth, acceptance, and above all, genuine love. Helen knew that the challenges had not completely ended. There was still the lawsuit against Camilla for misappropriation of the jewels, the restructuring of some aspects of the company after the merger with Paul Anderson, the gradual rebuilding of Robert's trust in his own judgment. But these were challenges they would face together, strengthened by shared experience. As Richard used to say, quoting his own father, "Storms don't last forever. And when they pass, they leave the air cleaner, the horizon clearer and the roots deeper." Looking at Robert, seeing in him not only the echo of Richard, but also his own resilience and determination, Helen knew that the roots of the Alistair family were, in fact, deeper than ever. Dear listeners, we hope that the journey of Helen and Robert Alistair has moved and inspired you. To continue following equally captivating stories about family ties, trust, betrayal, and redemption, be sure to subscribe to our channel and activate notifications. We have a special playlist with narratives that explore the complexity of human relationships. Find it by clicking on the left. If this story touched your heart, leave your like and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from and what impressed you most about this family saga. Every day we bring new stories that explore life's challenges and triumphs, always with that unique touch that makes them special. Until next time.